year you read every major global report on reputation, risk, and resilience. So the rest of us don't have to do that. And then you tell us what all this means. And your report has just dropped. You've read hundreds of pages of data, organizations like the WEF, AXA, Edelman, the Page Society, so we don't have to. You've told me the context surrounding this year's report is like nothing we've experienced. That's compelling, what's going on.
I mean, I wish I could answer the question of what's going on and why. Sadly, I am neither that good nor, in fact, God. So I'm going to dodge the actual question, which is why is what's going on going on? I think what is going on is a continuation of what I saw last year and have felt over recent years. Last year, I talked about relatively stable risks becoming more embedded and more structural. And interestingly, yet again, I think we tend to think about risk as the world is moving fast, therefore, what's the latest thing to be scared of? And I think that obviously, although we've seen, the degree of actual or potential armed conflict escalate in the last 12 months. So that is genuinely new. We've seen geopolitics becoming very geoeconomic. But I think broadly what we are seeing is the same trend, is a set of relatively stable dynamics becoming simply worse, more entrenched, more embedded, more structural, and therefore more alarming, but above all else, ever more interconnected. 2 years ago, I coined the phrase risk intersectionality. We talk about intersectionality in a DE&I context, but it feels that's exactly what's happening with the risk and threat environment, is that while each of the dynamics that we're seeing in and of itself is worrying and alarming, it's the mutually reinforcing interplay of the way that all of those dynamics play off each other and compound each other as well. So stable risks, entrenched and deepened, and ever more interconnected and more intersectional.
So this was 12 reports, right? And you identified 10 key themes. So as you go through the report, and there's a link in the notes, there's 10 key themes to read up on. You mentioned geoeconomics overtaking geopolitics, AI finally hitting the risk register, about time, and what you call, this is intriguing, what you call an embedded psychological epidemic in the workforce. So which of those feels most dangerously underestimated by organizations right now, and why? And my intuition is AI, because it's AI and I keep hearing about it and I know it's dangerous.
Yeah, and I'm not going to pretend. I mean, was I surprised that it took AI quite so long to, find its way into this body of work that I reviewed? Kind of yes and no. Last year, I was genuinely surprised that it was there or thereabouts, but it was kind of sitting at the fringes of risk registers. This year, it's come screaming into the picture. And yes, intuitively, I mean, as you and I were chatting about the other week, it is potentially nuclear in every sense. Its ability, let's leave aside AGI and the singularity, and does it happen next year or 20 years? None of us know. Not even Anthropic and OpenAI know the answer to that question. So let's park the singularity. Intuitively, AI is the most scary. Actually, if you pin me to the wall and said pick one, it would be what I call the embedded psychological pandemic, because I think what we've seen is two dynamics playing off each other. One is an absolute, a real hit on the world's mental health. One of the reports from International SOS estimates that there are 1 billion people on the planet living with poor mental health. I mean, I kind of question that in a way, because as we all know, mental health isn't on or off. You don't have good mental health or bad mental health. You just have mental health that slides up and down a spectrum. But that detail aside, you have incredibly damaging figures around mental health on the one hand, and then on the other, there is an absolute plummet, I don't know if plummet's a noun, a huge fall yet again in people's engagement with the workplace. So Gallup, their State of the Global Workforce report last year reported the first drop in global employee engagement in 3 years. This year it dropped even further, and the aggregate number globally is 21%, and they estimate that the net impact of employee disengagement globally is $10 trillion. You can take the figure for what however you want it. But if you stand back and look at those two dynamics, poor mental health and falling employee engagement, that for me has enormous economic, political, societal ramifications. Last year I described what I called the new pandemic of falling mental health, of worsening mental health and worsening employee engagement as a new pandemic, which is one of the sleeping giant risks. These risks that I said that were not hiding in plain sight, like all the things we see in our news feeds, geopolitics, geoeconomics, AI, cyber, we all know they're going on and therefore we respond to them. I think along with sort of tensions intergenerationally, last year I talked about this pandemic as a sleeping giant. I think it remains a sleeping giant, and that is why, to answer your original question, I think it is so alarming.
And this is where we're pulling back. We're less willing to speak up. We're less willing to fill out those 360 reports for how we intersect with our managers. We're less willing to comment on social media, which, by the way, I understand because it feels like a cesspool there.
Yeah,
we're just not willing to step forward.
Yeah, and if I can just add, I mean, another couple of very related findings. One of the 10 was what I called the awareness versus preparedness gap. That report after report, whether it is about cybersecurity, whether it is about employee engagement and motivation, report after report basically says we are aware of risks, but we are not prepared for them, and we know we're not prepared for them. So if you put those two together, the human psychological pandemic and epidemic on the one hand, and the awareness versus preparedness gap on the other, my concluding number 10 is what I call the human blind spot. Is that of all of the gaps between awareness of risk and preparedness for them, it is those involving humans, human well-being and humanity that for me is the biggest issue net. And I've been talking about human preparedness and what I call critical human infrastructure for years. And I continue to believe that because of those two dynamics together, the human blind spot is deeply, deeply worrying.
Well, and it must be okay because my neighbors aren't prepared either, right? Neither are my friends. So I'm just part of the, it just gets worse. Okay, so you've built this year's practical recommendations in the report around a single overarching concept, assuming agency. What do you mean by that? And why does that idea feel urgent in this world where so many people feel that they've lost control? And is there such a thing as control?
Absolutely. So I mean, control is the obvious starting point. If you say the word agency, people have lost agency. They tend to think it means I've lost control. For me, control is and always has been a myth. I mean, in comms terms, people saying we want to control the message or control the narrative. Was that ever possible? I'm not even so sure. Even if it was true at some point historically, it fundamentally isn't now. So let's park control as a myth. If you don't have control, can you influence? And of course, influence is fundamental to what we do. But I think that the way, my basic argument is the way that to unlock influence, the way to hope to have any influence, whether on unlocking opportunities positively or mitigating and managing threats and risks, mitigating the downside. It's agency. And what I've done in the report is basically really dived deep into what does the word agency mean. And I won't bore you with all the detail, but effectively, if you look at agency through the lens of linguistics and philosophy and psychology, it all comes down to the idea of agency, meaning that you are taking conscious action, conscious, willful, purposeful action in order to try and change things. So my basic argument is that whether individuals or organizations have any hope of influencing, far less controlling, they need to basically step up and take agency. And from a issues and crisis perspective, it doesn't mean waiting for the balloon to go up and then using agency. It's about early on very proactively identifying what are all the vulnerabilities for our organization, reputationally and relationship-wise, and what can we do to de-risk our organization. That is what agency means very practically.
Okay, if we're influencers, inevitably the ones I want to influence are those not necessarily opposed to what I think or what I think they should do, but those who aren't at a point. Maybe I need them to do more of something, or maybe I need them to change from oranges to apples. My inclination is the way to influence is to first understand. Rod, I cannot influence you or persuade you by giving you new information. I can only do that by understanding what already exists for you as a thought process and as a feeling process. So my question is, do we seem to be doing enough to first seek to understand? Or are we so busy trying to educate people on how to do things and think things?
So funnily enough, I laugh only because that is what I've done, because, people like words, but they love a picture, is that I've basically tried to sort of embody the whole agency thing in a single picture, in a single diagram.
Oh, good luck. How did you do that?
Well, you'll see when the report's out. But essentially, what I've done is I've taken the 10 elements of agency and I've broken them into 2 blocks. So the first block is around what I call sense making, which is first of all understanding context. What is going on or could go on that presents risk and danger for the organization. So it could be in the preparedness phase, or it could be after something has happened. Either way, you need to understand context. Then you need to understand potential consequence, which could be and often is negative, but can also be positive, remembering that a crisis properly defined is only ever a turning point containing both risk and opportunity. So, a lot of that is around listening and understanding. So, there's context, there's consequence, there's accountability and responsibility, and so it goes on. So there are 5 elements of agency which are around sense making, and then there are 5 which are around sense giving, which is having listened and analysed and understood. How do you demonstrate empathy? How do you operationalize that empathy with action? How do you back up the action with interaction? So again, I'm not going through every one of the 10, but as I say, it's 10 ideas broken into 2, one around sense making and the second around sense giving, all based on the idea I unpacked last year that you need to start with the self and the understanding of what you might have done, but above all else, focus on the other, those you may have impacted. Because I think in a crisis, organizations do what human beings do when faced with trauma, is fight, flight, or freeze. But you have to get beyond the immediate Pavlovian reaction of trauma and go, ultimately, my reputation and relationships will be impacted by how I treat the other, not how I defend the self.
You wrote a letter to the reader in this year's report that says something I kind of find moving. I like this approach, that you want communicators to read the report as a human being first, not just as a professional. In my mind, that says heart more than head, but why does that matter so much to you?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, as a writer, when you're writing these things, last year I added, and I've kept it in this year, a very punchy, provocative letter to the CEO and chair. So I have a putative corporate affairs director, Ms. D. Risk. You'll see the terrible crisis obsessive pun there, which was essentially trying to encapsulate the entire ethos of the report and my core beliefs as an issues and crisis communicator, and throw down a gauntlet to the CEO and chair and say, we need to talk about this. Last year it was about rethinking risk and reimagining crisis. This year it's about assuming agency, and the second part, it's assuming agency and achieving balance, which we can get into if time and interest allows. But I also thought, that's great, but it's all very professional. And when I thought about some of the most acute crises I've been involved in, ultimately, if you strip it all back, crisis management, crisis communications basically involve, frankly, normally decent human beings trying to do the right thing by other human beings. And some of the best advice I've given at 3 o'clock in the morning after 18 hours when I'm dog tired aren't about the craft and technique of crisis communications. They're how do you support those decent human beings to make decent decisions? So I had this light bulb moment that went, why not say to people, read this as a human being first, because ultimately the best advice you will ever give will come from the well of your humanness and humanity, not from your ability to write a scenario plan or a Q&A document. So, I say in the document, the fact that you love live football but loathe crowds, the fact that you abhor cabbage but adore kimchi, that is relevant and material because it's what makes you you. So many people may only ever read this as professionals. Long may it continue. This is obviously predominantly a professional piece of work. From my experience, they will get an extra layer of richness from it if they read it through the lens of their role as a partner or a parent or a citizen or a neighbor.
I love it because we are professionals who work with and for people, and you're taking
Correct.
the user experience approach.
Yes.
So, Rod, thanks for doing the report again, and thanks for your time today.
It's always a pleasure, Doug. Thank you for having me on.